Games Workshop, what are you doing? Why? Well, let's be honest. We know why. Hey, do you know who Games Workshop is? They're a pretty small company from the UK. They make these tiny little miniatures and kind of a little franchise called Warhammer. You know, they've been kind of popular throughout the years, but recently they have been blowing up. You might have even heard of a cool game that came out. It's like, there was like a Warhammer 1 Total War and a Total Warhammer 2, and I think there's a third one that's been announced, and I think it's actually pretty cool. But jokes aside, Games Workshop is one of the biggest companies in the UK and has had a massive rise to fame, especially in the last couple of years. Through COVID, they've had a massive surge of people going out and buying models, because why not? It's so fun to go and sit down, buy a few models from Games Workshop, get a few Warhammer out, whether it's Age of Sigmar or 40k if that's more your thing, setting up your little paint pot and just spending hours and hours relaxing and enjoying painting your favorite warmongering death machine. But Games Workshop isn't just the models. Of course, because the IP has become so big, they've branched out into other things, whether it's TV shows, animations, games, working with some of the biggest developers in the gaming industry, like Total War. You've had the Dawn of War franchise that has been completely massive in the past, and whilst it didn't come back too strongly with Dawn of War 3, hopefully one day they will know what they did wrong. But Games Workshop hasn't just worked with these massive franchises. You see, the Warhammer IP is so big, it's really spanned out to smaller companies. You've had companies like Fat Shark making the incredibly popular and so intensely fun Vermintide series and the Darktide series that should be coming in the future. But it goes even smaller, with more indie developers bringing out Warhammer games as well. Then modders start to get involved, modding games like the Total War franchise in order to bring Warhammer into it. Then animations start getting made. Astartes, one of the most popular Warhammer 40k animations on YouTube, and my god, is it one of the most beautiful things I've ever seen. And they're moving down even into the lower levels of this sort of thing, with Warhammer YouTube channels talking about the lore behind Warhammer, using art and footage and animations in order to back up their points they are making, all supposedly within fair use. But I think that's all going to change. You see, Games Workshop have always been somewhat lenient with their IP. Not drastically, of course, they're still a company that need to protect their franchise, so people can't just go making money willy-nilly off the creatures, games, and worlds that they've created through the decades of their existence. But they've never been incredibly strict, and that's why we've got so many Warhammer games, and that's why it's kind of got a reputation of, yes, we've had some great stuff like Vermintide and Total War Warhammer, yet that also brings in the terrible side of the Warhammer franchise as well when it comes to game development. But it seems that Games Workshop have had enough. They are now cracking down to the extent where they are going to stop people from creating Warhammer content without their permission, period. Now it has to be solely through Games Workshop. It doesn't matter if you're making a profit off it or not, and this is an issue. You see, the majority of people affected by this are people like you and me, people that are just hobbyists of the franchise, people that like making mods for other games. I mean, when Total War Warhammer came out, Games Workshop already had an issue with the fact that Total War was an incredibly moddable game and there was such a big modding community around it. They didn't want people to take their Warhammer franchise in that Total War game and turn it into something else, another IP. And I understand that. But the problem is when it starts moving to other stuff with smaller modding teams who don't make any money of the Games Workshop IP, and if anything, it really just helps promote and expand the Games Workshop franchise. Warhammer has been so popular through mods and things like animations, and these are the people that are going to be taking the biggest hit from this crackdown from Games Workshop. You know, Astartes can no longer make animations without Games Workshop's permission, and Games Workshop, I think I so far have said to him, come and join us, we'll hire you, but I've heard that there's been some other talks with all the other animators and cinematic makers for Warhammer on YouTube. Games Workshop has contacted them saying, join us, we'll hire you, but if you don't want to come into our circle, you can't make these animations anymore. There's no such thing as a self-employed standalone Games Workshop cinematic maker anymore. You might be thinking that's insane. They're not making money off it, they're doing for free. Yet that's just the way that companies work, and Games Workshop has sort of skirted around it for the last decade or so, but it seems like they've finally moved into that incredibly corporate cracking down on anything with their IP. They've even said they can go after you just for using artwork or imagery, and I understand artwork, right? Art takes hours and hours and years of practice in order to create. Some of the concept art for Warhammer is impeccable, and it has been used in Warhammer lore videos and, you know, just talking about Warhammer on YouTube in general. And it's a bit of a grey area. You see, videos and cinematics that people use in their YouTube videos, you can say that's fair use because they can just use little snippets and cut them up. But when you're using a full picture, it's a bit harder to call fair use on that sort of thing. But this means lore channels that just talk about Warhammer can be striked down by Games Workshop just by using a picture, some imagery from a Warhammer property, whether it's a book, an animation, artwork, or even a game possibly. And I think this is where the main problems lie, the smaller people that are affected. Of course, you want to protect your IP. It's something that every company needs to do, and it's completely understandable. You can't just have people taking Warhammer, using that massive name and making a terrible game from it to make a quick buck. And Games Workshop, unfortunately, are in their full rights to do that. They own the IP. It's something they've created for themselves, and just giving it out to other people doesn't really seem like a good idea for them if it's going to lose their money. But people that make a quick buck off their name aren't the people that are really going to be affected. It's the people that love this franchise and do it as a hobby, that make these free animations and cinematic for people to use and see on YouTube, that make these lore videos talking about the background of every single race, weapon, person, world in Warhammer, that have such big followings and fan bases, and all of a sudden they're at risk. Now, of course, it's not confirmed that Games Workshop are going to start striking and taking down these videos, but with this new move in terms of cracking down on their IP, they've now stated that they can. They're not saying that they will, but they've said that they can. And I think that's just something that people are going to have to keep in the back of their minds. If they're making Warhammer content on YouTube, fortunately, it's not something I do all that often, but if it's something that you rely to pay rent with, it's your full-time job making lore videos about Warhammer, it's always going to be at the back of your mind that if Games Workshop get a bee in their bonnet, if one of the community people are in a bad mood one day, they can just strike down your video and even potentially strike down a channel that is making money off this sort of thing. Would they do that? That's the bigger question. You see, the strike back from the community would be insane, because this move that they've already announced is terrible for the community. It makes sense from a business standpoint, and I think to some extent this needs to be done, but there's a point where it affects the wider community, the smaller people that doing this as a hobby, that in fact might make Games Workshop lose money. You see, the people that buy the games, the people that buy the miniatures, the people that watch the animations aren't the corporate people. They're the fans, they're the hobbyists, and if you piss them off, if you start striking down their favorite lore YouTube channel, that's going to lose them money. And I think that's where Games Workshop need to be very, very careful. This could affect the modern community, people that don't necessarily like the base game of a Total War but would play it through mods. Okay, that means they're not going to buy your Warhammer Total War game because you've strike down any mods that can be made for it, so you're losing money there as well. And it brings up that age-old question that we've seen with companies like Nintendo who have done a similar thing in the past. Would your franchise, would your company, and would your IP be as big as it is today if it wasn't for those fan animations, if it wasn't for those modders, if it wasn't for those lore videos? Would you be earning the money and be in the position you were today for having those hundreds of millions of pounds in order to strike down anyone that makes free content on your game? Would you be able to do that if it wasn't for that free content in the first place? So why are they doing this? Why has Games Workshop all of a sudden decided to do this? Because they've been pretty well liked in the past. They've been kind of lax, and people have been able to grow these massive channels making free content to do with their IP in the past. So why now? What is the meaning behind this? And I think it's just about their new streaming platform. It's a subscription service called Warhammer Plus that has been hyped up massively, giving things like VIP access to events, you know, artwork, magazines, that sort of thing, but also a video service that one of the main selling points are Warhammer animations, Warhammer's shorts, and maybe even potentially Warhammer TV shows in the future. And this is why I think they're cracking down on it. Because Astartes, one of the biggest Warhammer animations on YouTube, has, I think, potentially been in talks to joining Games Workshop and could potentially be on the streaming service. But if they're on that streaming service and someone's making a free version of YouTube, why wouldn't people just watch the free version on YouTube? And that's why Games Workshop are cracking down on this now, to stop people making those free versions on YouTube, to say to these animators, these cinematic makers, these Warhammer channels, look, you can do this, but you've got to do it for us. You've got to put it on our streaming platform, and you've got to work for Games Workshop. You can't do it for free on YouTube anymore. And that's why I think they're putting that ultimatum in. Of course, nothing's confirmed. Games Workshop haven't said anything about this. And whilst these are the rules that they've started to put in place, and while they've been announcing this sort of thing, who knows what could happen? But I think that's what the scary thing is. A channel with a few 100,000 subscribers on YouTube doesn't stand a chance if Games Workshop wants to come after them. And now Games Workshop has stated that they can do it. Not that they will, but they can. It's going to deter people from making those videos, from watching those videos, and then from going out and buying Warhammer anyway, especially in this really weird time where even articles have come out with potentially Games Workshop now allegedly underpaying their staff. It looks like they're going in a weird direction. I think it's going to take a lot to come back from these few bad decisions that we've heard in the past few months, but let's hope the outcry from the community, let's hope the videos that have been made, and of course the people that have contacted Games Workshop and stated that that this is not something that is a good idea in order to grow your franchise, maybe they would listen. But please let me know what you think. Do you think this is a good idea from Games Workshop? Of course, I think most people watching this video understand that as a company, they have to go along these lines of cracking down on an IP. But to what extent can they go before they start hurting their own franchise by destroying the community that made it? So please leave your comments down below. Leave a like on the video if you enjoyed it. Leave a dislike if you didn't. But until then, I will see you in the next one.